In the last video, we implemented basic room switching. Functionally, it's working great, but it's pretty jarring. Can we make this a bit smoother? Of course we can. Now that we have this transition manager, we can do all sorts of cool things. But let's start with something basic, a bare bones fade transition. Back in the transition manager's create event, we are going to need to set up a super basic state machine. We really only have two states. We're either fading out or fading in. So let's add an isFadingOut variable and set it to true, since we need to fade out before we can fade in, right? We'll need the length of our transition. We'll start it out being quite long so we can actually see it, 3 seconds or 180 steps. We'll hijack image alpha to control the fade level, so let's start that at 0. And we'll need some sort of timer to track progress on our fade. I'll call it timer and set it to 0. We don't want to change rooms until we are fully faded out, so let's just delete the room goto line. In the room start event, we don't want to destroy this instance yet since it still needs to draw the fade in, so delete that line as well. Let's add a step event to manage the fade. We'll start by incrementing our timer, then set up our state machine with a simple if-else. If we are fading out, we'll use lerp to set our image alpha based on our timer and transition length. And then if the timer equals our fade length, we're fully faded out and ready to transition to the next room. We need to reset the timer to 0, set isFadingOut to false, and then we can call room goto. Now we can set up our fade in. Down in the else branch of this code, we again set image alpha based on our timer and length, but with the first two arguments swapped, so we move from 1 towards 0. If the timer equals the length, we're done with the transition and can destroy this object. Now it's time for the fade itself. If you want the fade to be under your UI, you could use the drawGUI event. And if you want it over your UI, you can use the drawGUI event. In this project, I think it makes more sense to be over the UI, so I'll add a drawGUI event. But this really comes down to preference, or it may even depend on the type of transition you want. In the drawGUI event, we set the draw alpha to our image alpha, set the color to black, and draw a rectangle that fills the whole GUI before resetting the draw alpha back to 1. I'm, once again, using my view and GUI macros in this project. I use them in every project. I highly recommend you do the same. There's a link in the description. Now when we hit our exit, we get a nice slow fade both out and in. Maybe it's a bit too slow, but at least we know it's working. What's great about this system already is we are not limited to using this just for in-game room transitions. We can also use it to fade from our press start screen to the first room of the actual game. Over in my start menu object, if the player has pressed spacebar and there isn't already an instance of transition manager, we create one, set the target room to our start room, and set the target entrance to an entrance that I need to go set up real quick. There we go. Now we get a nice fade as we start the game. So this system more or less works, but there are a lot of ways we could enhance and polish it. Let's talk about some of those. Depending on how you've set up your game's camera, you may notice that when you get to your new room, the camera has to zip over to the player's position. If you're using the camera from my recent tutorial series, which supposedly fixes this issue, you still may or may not see this issue. And the reason it's random is because the room start event sort of sucks. We cannot 100% control which room start event happens in which order. So my camera manager might focus on the player instance I dropped in the room, then my transition manager will position them on the entrance, forcing the camera to chase the player that just teleported across the room. This can cause a lot of problems beyond just cameras and transition systems. I'll be releasing a video explaining how to fix it in a more general way soon, so make sure you're subscribed and keep an eye out for the next episode of GM Anatomy. If you're from the future, there's a link on screen or in the description. My advice until then is to pick one of the objects involved in this room start event race, I'm going to pick my transition manager, and that's the only object in this project that gets an actual room start event. The other objects, just my camera in this case, will move their room start code into a method, and my transition manager will call that method in its room start event so I can ensure the player character is in position before the camera snaps to it. You'll have to do this for any room start event that isn't executing in the correct order. But even if you aren't currently seeing this issue, you should still watch the video because it can happen completely at random. Upgrading to a new version of GameMaker, releasing on a different target platform, or adding and removing instances from your rooms. If you don't handle it, it can bite you. As my character walks around, they face the correct direction based on the buttons I press. Explaining how I do this with either 4 or 8 directional characters is another video I have planned. However, if you already have your character changing directions, you might notice that they aren't often facing the way you'd like when they get to the new room. It shouldn't be difficult to fix, assuming you have some sort of facing direction variable. In the Transition Manager's Room Start event, we position the player at the desired entrance marker, but if you remember back in the first video, when I placed my entrance markers, I rotated them so the arrow would point the direction I want my characters to face. Now we get to enjoy the fruits of that effort. When we position the player, we can also set the relevant face direction variable, mine is called face steer, to the image angle of the entrance instance. Hey all, Editor Pope here. I thought I could get away without talking about Modulo until the future video on top-down character sprites, but that may have been a mistake. So remember way back when I was rotating the entrance to face the correct way, and I said to make sure you only set them to 0, 90, 180, or 270? The reason that's important is because the most basic implementation of the face steer code is a switch statement that looks for a specific angle and uses the correct sprite for that given angle. Since we are looking for a specific angle, we can't support angles greater than or equal to 360 or less than 0. And the more advanced users watching this might say, well, just use Modulo to keep the angle between 0 and 360. And you would be correct for any number greater than 360, but for negative numbers, Modulo doesn't work the way you might expect. We intuitively know that an angle of negative 90 is the same as 270, down. But negative 90 mod 360 in GameMaker is just negative 90, which isn't going to work for us at all. So we need to use a script called mod2, link in the description. That will take negative 90 and give us 270. If we use it to set my face steer like this, then the actual angle of the entrance doesn't matter as long as the arrow is pointing in a cardinal direction. Sorry for the confusion. Now, they are always facing the right way. If you're making a side scroller and only need to worry about facing left or right, your face steer variable might just be a positive one or a negative one. Instead of rotating the entrances, you could flip their image X scale and use that. You may have noticed that while the game is fading out, nothing is stopping the player from just going wherever he wants. If I really mess with it, I can even get him out of bounds. That's obviously not good, and there are a lot of ways to solve this. The easiest is probably to stop listening to input when an instance of Transition Manager exists. Or you could use that shiny new pause system you just watched a tutorial for. If you want to get really fancy, you could set up a sort of micro cutscene where the character just keeps walking in the correct direction, and maybe even is walking when the game starts fading in the next room. I did just that in this other project where I used the rotation angle of the exit and entrance objects to control the walking direction during transitions. I think this looks really nice, and again, I'll cover this in more detail in a future video. As I said at the very beginning of the first video, I've added an instance of my player object to every room in my game. But is this what you should do? Not necessarily. The common debate is whether your character object should be persistent and just come with you to each room or not. I'm not a big fan of this. I feel like the actual player object should be transient. Anything important enough that it should persist between rooms, current and max health, gold, inventory, equipment, etc. That should all be in your game state data, not stored in variables on the player object. I don't want to encourage keeping that data on the player character just because it may be convenient. If you agree, then should you be dragging and dropping an instance of your player object in every room? Ideally, no. Not only would that be tedious and annoying, you might have multiple playable characters in your game and can't be sure which character the player is actually using at any time. So it's probably best for the transition manager to create an instance of the correct player character object at the start of each room. We'll set that up in the next video. With the timing on our fade out adjusted to something more reasonable and a few of those little issues fixed, this system is looking pretty solid. But it could be so much more. While a fade transition is nice, certainly you don't want every transition in your game to just fade to black, right? Well, in the next video, we'll convert this system into a customizable transition machine, capable of using almost any visual effect you can imagine for your transitions. I will warn you though, there is going to be a significant jump in complexity and difficulty. So if you are still fairly new to GameMaker, you might want to just roll with this system as is for a while. But if you're up for a challenge and willing to do a bit of studying to prepare, we're going to do some cool stuff, like this spotlight transition and this intra-room warp transition. If you like this video and want to see more like it, be sure to hit every button you can find below the video. Except report. Don't hit report. That wouldn't be good for me and would likely do the exact opposite of getting you more videos like this. If you want to support me on Patreon, you can do that too. If you have questions or just want to hang out with other GameMaker users, join the GM Discord server. Seriously. Like, come on. It's great. I practically live there, and I, or someone smarter than me, will help you with almost any coding problem you might have. It doesn't have to have anything to do with my videos. There's an invite in the description, and feel free to ping me in the lounge when you get there to say hi. I want to shout out my friend Mash Arcade again for the awesome art I'm using in this demo project, especially the Pope sprite. It's super adorable. Thanks for watching. Now go make something awesome. Special thanks to my Cash Cardinals, DJ Gibbles, Fixing the Stupid, and Peter Jorgensen.